Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. South Korea is at a historic moment as the Constitutional Court weighs President Yoon Suk Yeol's impeachment, a case that could reshape the country's leadership. Impeached in December over his proclamation of martial law, Yoon faces key constitutional questions over the constitutionality of the declaration, as well as the crackdown of key political figures. For Yoon to be removed from office, at least 6 out of 8 justices must vote in favor, but uncertainties still linger as a decision to appoint another Constitutional Court justice remains pending. To break down these unfolding legal battles, we are joined by 2 experts who have been closely following the situation. So we first connect to Song Se-ryun, Professor of Law at Kyunghee University. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
And also joining us is Lee Hyun, Dean and Professor of Law at Handong International Law School. Great to see you again, Professor.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
So let's begin our discussion with Professor Song. So the Constitutional Court is set to hold another deliberation on March 7th following its session on the 5th to discuss President Yoon's impeachment trial. What key aspects will the justices focus on during the deliberations?
So what's before the justices are not the quality of his presidency, whether he was a popular president or not. Their focus is very narrow, which is the constitutionality of his particular action of declaring the martial law. So they'll look at the Article 77 of the Constitution that governs the martial law, and they'll look at the elements, whether there was a genuine national emergency, their procedures are followed, deployment of military forces was proper, and their use of sending those troops to national election commissions. Those would be examined. And there were testimonies and evidences offered during the hearings. So they will be the fact finder to essentially decide who to believe and what to put a more weight in terms of determining which evidence governs. And most of all, they'll also look at the impact of the martial law. Even if there were some infractions, violations, was it grave enough or important enough to strip him of the office of presidency? And remember, this is a very important trial where the unelected justices are looking at the situations and cases of the president who was elected by the people. So in terms of determining the outcome of it, they will be very, very careful, and they'll probably don't leave any stones unturned.
Right, so they would have to weigh in multiple legal and constitutional factors before reaching a final decision. Now, a key factor in the court's decision-making process would be the appointment of Constitutional Court Justice nominee Ma Eun-hyuk, and acting President Choi Sang-mok has delayed making a decision on his appointment, and some believe he may wait until the impeachment ruling on Prime Minister Han Duck-soo is announced. Professor Lee, what's the reason behind this delay, and how might this impact the court's proceedings?
Well, as we know, acting President Choi basically punted on the decision to appoint Ma in this case because in this situation, he argued anyway and justified his decision not to appoint the 3rd justice in this case because there was no agreement between the political parties as to the appointment. As we know, he appointed 2 justices, one that was recommended by the ruling party and one that was recommended by the opposition party. But in this case, because of the circumstances with specifically now the impeachment trial of the prime minister, who was originally impeached because he failed to make the appointments, I think what's happening here is acting President Choi is basically waiting it out at this point and seeing whether or not the prime minister will be actually reinstated. And so I think the anticipation is that, of course, if the prime minister, in fact, is reinstated, then the prime minister becomes the acting president again. And I think in this case, the current acting president, we're on our 2nd acting president, he doesn't want to sort of make the decision at this point because obviously it has lots of political volatility, and I don't think he wants to be the one to sort of make that call, particularly if the prime minister is going to be reinstated. So at this point, this is partly a waiting game on the part of the acting president, because the acting president originally failed to make the appointment. So I don't think he wants to be tagged with the decision, specifically if the Prime Minister Han, is going to be reinstated. But now the difficult question becomes, if the Prime Minister is not going to be reinstated, and this is the question, what will he do as a response? So I think we're all waiting to see what will happen given the time frame of the decision on the impeachment of the Prime Minister.
Right, so it's a very sensitive issue, so he would have to consider the Prime Minister's ruling as well. Now, historically, the impeachment rulings for former Presidents Roh Moo-hyun and Park Geun-hye were delivered within 2 weeks after the final arguments were made. So if nominee Ma is appointed before the ruling, how could his participation affect the timing and potential outcome of the decision, Professor Song?
Well, first off, 2 weeks is not set in stone. It depends on the complexity of the case and circumstances. I guess joining of the rank of the justices, if Judge Ma joins the team, then it throws a pretty big question mark there. My cautious prediction, as shared by many experts, is that the timing of joining the Constitutional Court would be very important. If the deliberations are just about done, probably Judge Ma joining would not affect the decision structures. Remember, in the impeachment trial of President Park Geun-hye, there were only 8 justices. They started with 9, but President of the Constitutional Court's term was up, and he was off the bench. So they decided at the end with 8 justices. In this case, if the Judge Ma joins during the back end of the process, probably he'll recuse himself or not be the part of the decision-making team, because there's no rule, even if the judge is on the roster, that he has to be in the decision-making team. If they decide that the Ma should be in the process, this is an unlikely kind of hypothesis, then you have to open up maybe the hearing part of it or deliberation part of it, and they run the risk of delaying so long that in the middle of April, 2 justices might come off the bench. I think that would be a bigger or graver problem that the justices want to avoid. So in this case, even if Judge Ma joins, probably it's too late in the game. And even if he does, probably more important that the justices will consider is that they render the decision rather than having a roster very short of making the decision.
Thank you for your opinion. What about Professor Lee? Are you on the same page with Professor Song that even if he joins the court, there would still be 8 justices making a final verdict? Or could you tell us about the have influence on the final decision of this appointment?
Right. Well, to follow on with what Professor Song was saying about the 8-justice system, because as we know, a full bench is all 9 justices. And as he indicated, in previous precedent with President Park's impeachment, we had 8 justices that made that decision. So because there's precedent, I think the Constitutional Court sort of is on very firm ground here with respect to making a decision with only 8 justices. But the complexity, of course, of all of this is the timing of obviously the next 2 justices that will have to sit this out if their term ends, of course, in April. But also the questions about voting itself, because with respect to the number of votes that are necessary, we know that you need 6 justices to make the decision to confirm the impeachment, because in this case with 8 justices, if 3 of them decide not to vote for impeachment, and as there are only 5 justices in favor, then President Yoon will be reinstated into office. And so partly this is a numbers game, with respect to how many justices will now vote in favor or against, and that really is the question. Because if you had the full bench with Justice Ma sitting on the bench, and given his position is viewed generally as being more favorable to the opposition party, potentially, that may be a vote, of course, in favor potentially of impeachment, not to prejudge what he would decide. But in any event, as people are speculating, the more judges you have on the bench, the more possibility that you'll get to the 6 justices to rule in favor of the impeachment. But, a lot of people observing the trial suspect, at least, or predicting, that maybe this will be a unanimous decision in this case. But, of course, you can't decide. You don't know until the justices actually make their decision. So with respect to, Justice Ma's potential appointment on the court, I agree with Professor Song that, his involvement will not have any relevance with respect to deliberations because of the timing, that it will delay the actual decision because of the fact that you would have to get him up to speed with respect to what has been happening in the court deliberations. And also, this court has indicated they want a speedy trial. And I think the country has been waiting for this for quite some time. And they expect the Constitutional Court to put this at the priority in terms of what decisions the court will make, because the whole country is waiting to hear how to fill this leadership vacuum at the very top. And so I think, Justice Ma's appointment is really an irrelevant factor ultimately when it comes to the decision of the Constitutional Court.
Right. So even though we consider or not Ma's joining or not this judgment, there would be a public reaction that's going to vary depending on whether the decision is unanimous or not. Professor Song, could you tell us what are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, decide if it's impeachment granted. That would be either 6-2 or 7-1 or 8-0. Doesn't make any difference in terms of what the decision is. Having said that, though, you're right. The messages are very different. If it's the unanimous, then the public, they're in a same front, saying that there's no doubt that this is a right decision. So the public outcry might not be very loud. I think that's the reason that the President Park Geun-hye's decision was decided 8-0, and President Roh Moo-hyun's decision was decided 9-0. Unanimous decision has that clean message to the public that the bench is in the same mind. But in this case, I think there are some genuine legal questions in terms of separation of power, where the president's right extends to, and what the judicial restraint should be exercised. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are some genuine differences in opinions, but I think that the hope is that they will resolve their differences and come up with near or a full unanimous vote, so that this divided country would have an easier time dealing with the aftermath of that decision.
Right, so it definitely gives a strong message. Then, given the high stakes of this ruling, some predict that the justices may continue deliberations until they reach a unanimous decision to ensure legitimacy, like Professor Song has mentioned. If this is the case, could the ruling be delayed further, Professor Lee?
Well, there's always that possibility, because we don't, of course, know what the justices are actually thinking in terms of how they should decide this case. Now, obviously, each justice will have to come to their, his or her own decision as to whether impeachment should be validated or not. But, I think, as Professor Song was mentioning, certainly a unanimous decision would certainly be a very clear mandate, a clear decision for the country to decide to move forward with respect to the decision, because the president himself, President Yoon, has declared that he will, of course, respect the decision of the court. But with respect to any dissenting judges, or at least judges who may have a very different mind when it comes to the decision, then there's going to be furious negotiations, or at least deliberations between the justices themselves as to the merits of the case, because again, each justice has to make a decision independent of the other justices. But being the court, and obviously given the momentous occasion of this decision, and this is going to have a decision that's going to reverberate for a very long time in Korean history, the court, I think, will have to think about its own legacy. And I think the justices probably will be thinking about that when they make their decision. But if there is not a unanimous decision, right, and let's say it's a split decision, either one in favor or the other, then you're going to have a furious kind of conversation in civil society among the people in terms of whether you're for or against the impeachment, and I think that's going to potentially lead to further division in the country. So I think there's a lot hanging on this decision by the Constitutional Court. But if a unanimous decision is going to be decided, I think it will certainly take time if there are in fact dissenters or people who justices who do not agree either or for the decision.
Right, so there's still room for delays at this point. Now, meanwhile, the impeachment ruling on Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, which was expected as early as this week, now appears to be postponed, and this delay follows the Constitutional Court's unusual decision to accept additional documents from the Parliament even after arguments had concluded. Professor Song, why did the court make this rare decision, and what does it suggest about the case?
Well, maybe not so rare. Remember, this proceeding, the Prime Minister Han Duck-soo proceeding, ended very, very quickly. And I think the justices were saying that sort of a compromising position that in terms of having a short meeting was meted by having more accommodations for requests from the parties. And I think it's in that spirit that they allowed the National Assembly's request. But I think today's news was that the prosecutor's office refused to submit their evidences or submit their materials. And they were allowed to do so because it's an ongoing trial. So if it is in ongoing proceedings, they certainly can guard their materials. And by doing so, what does not really change is that the National Assembly does have that material already from the Constitutional Court proceedings. So a lot of people thought that this was a delaying tactic when they requested the materials that they already have. But I guess by the refusal of the prosecutor's office, probably this issue is moot. Probably we can expect that the court firm up the schedule to decide on this case.
So staying with Han's trial, some people argue that the impeachment trials of Han and President Yoon share overlapping legal issues, which raises the possibility that the court might deliver rulings on both cases simultaneously. What are the chances of this happening, Professor Lee?
Right. I mean, I think certainly it's possible in terms of the court kind of making its decision, at the same time, announcing both the impeachment issue of the President Yoon and Prime Minister Han, because the nature of as you noted in the question, sort of the similarities in some of the issues that are raised, specifically the question of procedure, whether or not the proper procedure was followed within the State Council to have the deliberation before martial law was actually declared. But I suspect that given the gravity, obviously, of the president's impeachment, I mean that's where all the biggest questions lie politically as well as legally. That it would be unlikely that the court would make a decision on both at the same time and announce it at the same time. You'd have to think that at least priority in this case would be given to the president's impeachment case, because once the president is reinstated, in part, the prime minister's impeachment, while certainly it could be decided upon, essentially becomes moot at some level, because really the big question here is whether or not who's going to be the president. Are we going to have the prime minister continue to be the acting president, or we're going to have President Yoon reinstated. So while it's certainly possible to have that, have that happen, given the conclusion of Prime Minister Han's trial, as well as the president, and given at least viewed from afar that these issues related to the prime minister could be concluded relatively quickly, I think the priority clearly will have to be given to the president in this case in terms of the decision whether or not to keep him in office or not. So yes, I think it's possible, but is it going to be likely? I doubt it. I think the country is waiting for a decision, primarily, of course, on the decision of whether the president will be reinstated or will he be in fact removed from office.
Right. Of course, that's what we're all waiting for. Now, concurrently, a ruling on President Yoon's motion to cancel his detention could also be issued as early as this week. Professor Song, why is the court taking time to deliberate on this matter?
Well, the court is certainly taking time to deliberate on this matter because the motion was made in early February, so we passed already the month mark, and usually this kind of action probably takes about 7 days to decide. I think it just reflects the unprecedented nature of this incident where the president, the current president, is detained. And I guess the reason for their careful deliberation is that the concern that they had when they were issuing this warrant, that there is a risk of witness tampering or the evidence tampering, maybe not the flight risk, but the president's intentions to rally his supporters, and there is resulted in storming the courthouse at one point. So those kind of things kind of figure into the decision as to whether the detention is a better course of action to investigate this case and have this proceeding go forward. I think that there are concerns that the whole nation is looking at this very, very intently with the divided factions and with the possibilities of violence even. So I think that the courts would be very cautious about changing the status quo at this point.
So with key rulings still pending, the court's extended deliberations seem to suggest the complexity and high stakes of these cases. So we'll have to keep close tabs on the coming days for any direction. But as of now, we'll have to conclude our discussion right here. Professor Song and Professor Lee, thank you so much for your insights tonight. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.